Good morning, everyone. If you would like to join me, we're going to be opening up today with hymn 152, Follow the Drinking Gourd.
Good morning. Welcome to Albany UU. I'm Eileen, your ministerial intern. You may know Alyssa already, who is our guest musician today. And also, we have with us Leah Purcell, who's our director of religious education. I want to tell you a story about emerging hope this morning that is a story about asparagus. Trust me. So I moved to Rochester, New York in 2009, and I moved into a house that was near the middle of the city, and it had this tiny little postage stamp of a backyard. It was just enough room for a little kitchen garden. And when I was thinking about putting in the garden and what to plant, I thought about planting asparagus. So maybe you know that asparagus is a perennial. It comes back every year, but it takes 2 or 3 years before you have anything worth harvesting when you grow asparagus. And I thought to myself, well, I probably won't be in this house in 3 years, so why bother? I'm not going to plant it. And I didn't plant it. And then I ended up living there for almost 9 years. Yeah. So to show you why this is a story about emerging hope, let me tell you a different story by the theologian Howard Thurman. He talked about walking down a country lane, and up ahead in the distance, he saw an old man in the field, a farmer in the field, planting seedlings quite a distance apart. So Howard Thurman came a little closer, and as he came closer, he noticed the seedlings that the man was planting were pecan trees. And he also noticed that the man looked quite elderly, this old farmer. So he wondered to himself, and he decided to go and approach the man and ask him a question. And he walked up and he said, "Excuse me, sir, you're planting pecan trees?" And the farmer said, "Yep." And Howard Thurman said, "And you yourself are quite old." And the farmer said, "Yep." kept on planting. And finally, Howard Thurman said the blunt statement, well, surely you know that pecan trees take more than a decade to bear any fruit. It's unlikely you'll be alive to eat a single nut from these trees you're planting. Why are you doing this? And the farmer stood up and dusted off his pants and said to Howard, all my life, I've eaten fruit from trees I didn't plant. And the person who plants only for his own harvest is a person who has no hope in the future. So I think Howard Thurman learned the lesson that I learned in Rochester the hard way, because I could have enjoyed years of asparagus, of that first sign of spring emerging, if I'd only had the generosity of spirit to plant it for somebody else. So may we all learn a lesson of hope today.
Of Babylon, where he sat down, and there he wept when he remembered Zion. Carry us away, captivity requires from us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Farai. By the rivers of Babylon, where he sat down, and there he wept when he remembered Zion. Carry us away, captivity requires from us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Farai.
Now is the time in our service when we light our chalice. Our chalice lighter this morning is Nadia Coleman Ibrahim. Maybe you've seen Nadia light the chalice on an earlier Sunday. She's really an old pro at this. So as Nadia lights the chalice, I invite us all to speak the words that are printed in your order of service. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally or ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. And I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join with us in singing hymn number 116, I'm on my way.
So are you guys familiar with doing the call and response aspect of this hymn? Just a little bit. All right. Just checking to see if you're familiar with the call and response aspect of the hymn. So I think what we're going to do, this side is going to sing the call with me. This side is going to do the response. So you got lots of support if you're not sure where to come in. You're just singing the exact same thing you just heard us sing. On my way to the freedom land, I I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I asked my sister, come and go with me. I asked my sister, come and go with me. I asked my sister, come and go with me. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I asked my brother, come and go with me. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. Nicely done.
Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Kathy Harris. I'm a member of the Green Sanctuary Committee and want to invite you to join us in the Corning Preserve next Saturday, April 21st. New York Parks and Trails is organizing a spring cleanup of the Erie Canalway. We've been asked to work in the Corning Preserve, and they said, it's not really the Erie Canalway. And I said, well, once you get to the Hudson, you got to go someplace, right? So it's good. Please refer to the insert in your order of service for time and directions. We want people of all ages. Bring rakes, trash grabbers if you have them, and work gloves. I have a few. Bring your lunch and drinking water. Garbage bags have been provided by Parks and Trails along with these wonderful T-shirts. At this point, the weather forecast is sunny and high in the 50s. Perfect for cleaning up. If you have any questions, please contact me. We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you have brought a guest or are a visitor and would like to tell us who you are and where you're from, please stand or raise your hand. Al will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear you.
Hello, I'm Isaac Cooper. I am a grad student at SUNY Albany, and I've taken a few classes right in that building over there. I've lived here for a couple of years, but have not yet come here, despite being born and raised to UU. I was born in New York and went to a lot of UU churches in the New York City area, Community Church and All Souls. And actually lived in Montgomery for a while, and my mother was a minister there. Some of you may know my mother, Tracy Sproul. She's like a vaguely well-known minister, but if you don't, then, don't be offended. Or I won't be offended, I should say. But anyway, that's who I am. Figured I'd come back to UUism after a long break, so...
Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm Margaret O'Connor Casey, and I'm here with my husband Dennis, and we're here because Eileen Casey-Campbell is our daughter, and this is... and also Rory is our grandson. So we're just delighted to be here. Thank you.
Anybody up top?
Thank you and welcome. If anyone would like to learn more about this congregation or about Unitarian Universalism, please stop by the welcome table in the lobby. And please take this opportunity to turn and greet the people seated near you.
So it's time for a story, and I invite any children who would like to come closer to the story I need you to have a seat on the floor, though, so everybody can see me. Great, and everybody can be comfortable. As folks are coming up, I'll let everybody know that children are welcome in the service. We also have Sunday school by ages if you would like to join us for that. Visitors are welcome. Parents and caretakers are welcome. Just after the story, you can follow me out through the hallway. It can help you know where to go. And message to everybody that if anybody needs to walk or talk or squawk, we ask you to go through the hallway to our fellowship hall where you can watch the service. And come back when you're ready, and that way everyone can hear the story and everything else. All right, so ready for a story? Yeah. Okay, great. We're going to have a little extra piece for the story today because we're going to sing a line from the song Follow the Drinking Gourd when I give you a little cue. So Alyssa's going to play it on the piano for us, and let's give it a run through. That is Follow the Drinking Gourd. Last line. Let's do it together. Follow the drinking gourd. Thank you. Now we're ready for our story. This is called Harriet Tubman's Journeys of Freedom. Harriet Tubman did not want to be a slave. She knew it was wrong for one person to own another as you would a cow or a horse or a cart. She knew it was wrong when she was 7 years old to be whipped by her mistress when the baby cried at night. She knew it was wrong for one person to work in the fields all day or the house and never get paid for their work. She knew it was wrong for families to be separated and sold and moved away from one another and never see each other again. Harriet often thought about freedom, how she might escape. And at night, she would have dreams of flying. But she would come against a wall in her flight. She could look over the wall, and there she saw women in white raising up their hands to pull her over the wall. But then her dream would end. Follow the drinking gourd. Now, when Harriet was a young woman, she learned that she and 3 of her brothers were to be sold to a plantation further south, where she would never see her family or husband again. It was time for Harriet to escape slavery, and she knew that trying to escape would be dangerous. The slave catchers would come after them with their dogs to sniff them out. And if you were caught, you would be severely punished or even killed. But Harriet knew she must be free, so she made an escape plan with her brothers. And one night, they all left to meet in the woods. Harriet left her husband sleeping in his bed because she knew that he did not want her to go. And so she and her brothers met in the woods, and they started on their journey towards freedom. But the brothers got afraid. and they wanted to go back. And Harriet urged them to continue, but they refused, and they made her come back with them. Follow the drinking gourd. After some point, Harriet knew that she had to escape by herself. Her father, Ben, had taught her the ways of the woods, and she knew how to find wild berries and nuts to live on. She knew how to walk silently without making a sound. She knew how to imitate bird calls. She knew that moss only grows on the north side of the trees, and you could feel for moss in the night on cloudy nights. But most of all, she knew how to find the Big Dipper, the drinking gourd, and the North Star to follow it to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. Harriet knew that she would need help, that she couldn't do this on her own, and she knew about the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad wasn't really a railroad, and it really wasn't underground. We say railroad because it was many paths from the south to the north, through the woods, through staying at people's houses, people who were abolitionists, white people and freed black people who knew that slavery was wrong. And it was called underground because it was secret. You had to know the codes to follow the Underground Railroad. And she knew where the first station was. And so one night she set out for her passage, and she walked from station to station, walking hundreds of miles, until she finally reached freedom. Harriet was free. Follow the drinking gourd. She could now earn money for herself. She could buy a house. She could choose who to work for. No one would ever whip her again. She could set up a pretty comfortable life for herself. But she could not be comfortable, knowing that there were millions of enslaved people back in the South. And she knew that she had to go help lead other people to freedom, no matter how dangerous it was. And she became a conductor on the Underground Railroad. For 8 years, she led hundreds of people towards freedom, following the North Star and walking to the safe stations on the Underground Railroad. Follow the drinking gourd. When the Civil War came, a law was finally made to end slavery all over the United States. No longer could any person ever own another person. Harriet lived for many years after that, working for the rest of her life to help the freed slaves begin their new lives. Follow the drinking gourd. And you might think that that's the end of the story, but it's not. The Civil War ended over 150 years ago, but white people still had power over the people who had been slaves, and over their children, and over their children's children. 50 years ago, a law was passed to make it safe for the descendants of African slaves and people of color to register to vote in this country. And there are still things that are going on in this country that make it unsafe for people of color to be in certain spaces. And that's why we have a Black Lives Matter outside hanging up. And also, we have, as Unitarian Universalists, guidance from the Black Lives of UU Organizing Collective. They were the ones that gave us the materials to do our white supremacy teach-ins last spring, and this past fall. And they are urging all of us Unitarian Universalists to adopt an eighth principle. Right now, how many do we have? 7, yep. And we have our rainbow colors for each one, but they're thinking about an 8th one. And I'd like to read it for you now. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. And that is an emerging hope for us. May it be so. And that's the end of the story for now. And so I would ask everyone to sing us out as Alyssa plays our song.
Before we continue with today's service, we have these announcements. The largest environmental rally since the fracking ban will be held on Monday, April 23rd, starting at noon in front of the Sheridan Hollow Power Plant at 79 Sheridan Avenue in Albany. Please go to the Green Sanctuary table for details. That's from Sandy Stubing. You can sign up for the Crop Hunger Walk starting today. Walkers can get their pledge packets at the Crop Walk table in Channing during coffee hour. We also welcome your pledges, which will be divided among our walkers. Please support Team UU in the Crop Walk. And thank you. That's from Dawn Dana. And this is from Carol Butt with the Green Sanctuary Committee. What is the connection between our consumer habits and climate change? The Green Sanctuary would like to hear your views on this. Please stop by our table in Channing during coffee hour to write some of your thoughts on an index card to share with us. You will find an opportunity at the Green Sanctuary table to list something that you would be glad to give away and or something you would like to see if someone wants to give away to you. Provide a description of the item and contact information for posting. Ask more about this project at the Green Sanctuary table today. We got the whole month, so get used to it. There's an environmental musical fundraiser for the Clearwater this afternoon at the Linda from 4 to 6:30 at 339 Central Avenue. And I think I draw your attention to the announcements printed in the order of service. Thank you.
And I invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. Many members and friends of Albany UU help support the good work of this congregation by an annual pledge. Another way we support the work that we do together is by putting a little something in the plate as it passes us by on Sunday mornings. So I ask you this morning to give as generously as you're able.
Between sundown's finish and midnight's broken toll, we ducked inside the doorway, thunder crashing. As majestic bells of bolts struck shadows in the sounds, seeming to be the chimes of freedom flashing. Flashing for the warriors whose strength is not to fight, flashing for the refugees on the unarmed road of light, and for each and every underdog, soldier in the night, and we gazed upon the chimes of freedom flashing. Even through the clouds, a white curtain in the far-off corner flashed, and the hypnotic splattered mist was slowly lifting. Electric lights still struck like arrows, fired before the ones condemned to drift or else be kept from drifting. Tolling for the aching ones on their speechless seeking trail, for the lonesome-hearted lovers with too personal a tale, and for each unharmful gentle soul is placed inside a jail, and we gazed upon the chimes of freedom flashing.
I invite you into a time of meditation and reflection, followed by shared silence. Maybe you want to get comfortable in your seat. Let your feet find the floor. Take a deep breath. And if you like, close your eyes. This morning's meditation comes to us from Oscar Romero. Salvation is not alienation. It is not going to heaven to think about eternal life and forget about the problems of the earth. It's a transcendence from the human heart. It is entering into the reality of a child, of the poor, of those wearing rags, of the sick, of a hovel, of a shack. It is going there to share with them. And from the very heart of misery of this situation, to transcend it, to elevate it, to promote it, and to say to them, you are not trash. You are not marginalized. It is to say exactly the opposite. You are valuable. Please join me in a time of shared silence. The title of this morning's sermon in the Emerging Hope series is Who Gets to Be Saved? So the discerning listener may have already figured out that the answer is in our name. Spoiler alert, the Universalist in Unitarian Universalist makes the answer to this question of who gets saved pretty clear. Everyone. We're obligated by our tradition to take the Nelson Mandela approach to salvation, to liberation, that freedom for some is freedom for none. But if you're here thinking, well, that was easy, I really could have stayed home this morning, bear with me. The answer is simple, but the show your work portion of this quiz is a little more complicated. What do we mean when we talk about getting saved, first of all? And absent a justice-seeking intercessory personal God who literally delivers us across oceans, how does this get accomplished? We heard a story from Leah this morning that echoes the story of Passover we told and enacted a couple weeks ago. You probably had some knowledge of both stories to begin with. These are familiar narratives. They get told and retold and acted out over and over. In the Passover story, Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and when they come to the obstacle of the Red Sea, he lifts his staff, the sea splits in two, and the people cross over into freedom. Harriet Tubman was called in her own time the Moses of Maryland. She and the people she helped cross over into freedom told and enacted the story of Passover in real time. She opened up pathways to liberation the way the character of Moses opened up the sea for the Israelites to walk across. And I doubt Tubman's heroism seemed any less plausible to the people she shepherded than Moses's did. And so when she succeeded in leading the way to freedom on the Underground Railroad without, as she said, losing a single passenger, the story of Passover began to belong to her and to her people. And she began to belong to that story. Harriet, Moses, they were one and the same. So let me tell you a little bit about how the story of Passover came to be. The text we have, the book of Exodus in Jewish and Christian scripture, sets the story at an unclear point in time, maybe somewhere around 1200 BCE, it indicates. But that's not when it was written. And there's not a shred of archaeological evidence or historical record that a massive group of people escaped slavery in Egypt at any point in history. Funny thing, empires keep really good records, and no Egyptian historian ever made mention of this mass exodus. It was written, as far as we know, in the 6th century BCE. You see, back in the 580s, Jerusalem was invaded by the great empire of Babylon. That's present-day Iraq. The power of the empire that had previously controlled that part of the world, Egypt, was waning, and Babylonian control of the region spread. The Babylonian army conquered the city of Jerusalem, pillaged the temple, and took some 10,000 Jewish citizens back to Babylon to be held in captivity there. The enslaved people had mostly been members of the higher classes of Israelite society. They were priests and scribes, students of law, members of the king's court. And lucky us, they were literate. These are the people who wrote the Jewish Bible. And all the evidence that we have says that they wrote it while enslaved in Babylon. Formerly the keepers of a ritual culture that centered on temple rites at the one and only Jewish temple in Jerusalem, these people struggled to find a way to make meaning in the world in the midst of trauma. They tried to preserve their old stories, rules for living, and to formulate a new way of being religious in a strange land. They ended up creating these texts filled with their pain, confusion about how to live now, how to make meaning, and a subtle but constant subversiveness to the authority of empire. From them, we get psalms like the one we heard sung twice today, Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there, we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Their trauma gave us this, and it gave us the story of Passover. Once upon a time, they wrote to their fellow captives and captors alike, we were the slaves of an evil empire, but divine power was on our side, and divine power favors justice over empire, and we were liberated. It's likely they enacted this story as a liturgy, like we did a couple weeks ago, their new religion being built in the midst of oppression around the enactment of the promise of liberation. What I'm trying to tell us is that this is not a story for and by people who used to be enslaved. It's not a looking back tale. It is a story of hope for people who are now enslaved. It was for the Israelites in Babylon. It was for Harriet Tubman and enslaved people in this country. It is for their descendants, whose lives are still devalued by the system of structural racism that created American slavery. It was for the Afro-Caribbean people, like the artists who arranged the music of the first version of The Waters of Babylon that Alyssa sung. It's a story for anyone at any time who is thrown to the margins by the expansive power of empire. This leaves us with a troubling question, though. We walked down this aisle on Easter, acting out this narrative as if it belonged to us. But we've got to ask ourselves, whose story is this? And who are we, really, in the story? If we're really being honest, who represents us? I can't answer for you, and I'm certain this room contains more than one answer. But for me, I know I'm not an Israelite waiting to cross over into freedom. At best, I'm an Egyptian bystander. I sit pretty comfortably on the side of empire. At least it feels comfortable as long as I do my best not to pay attention to what's happening down at the water's edge. So the question feels murkier now, right? Who gets to be saved? All of us? How do we tell this story as Universalists and as people of power and privilege? Do I really want to see those waters split? What happens to me when they do? Is there a chance, I ask myself, that I'm a charioteer about to get washed under by the tidal wave of liberation? When I do pay attention to what's happening at the water's edge, though, when I go there to be beside the storytellers of today, I think maybe that's exactly what I need. To be washed by a wave of liberation. To let that water heal my wounds along with those whom it liberates, as uncomfortable as that may be. The thing is, I have a stake in the empire of today. Maybe you do too. I'm a white, middle-class American citizen, and the order of empire privileges me. The chaos of liberation will not. The thing is also, though, that we are injured too by our own complicity in oppression. I am, and those who can relate to my status in this story are as well. Even we don't come to our privilege unscathed by its procurement. Even we don't come to our privilege unscathed by its procurement. In other words, our stake in wounding others, however small, wounds us too. I too am bound by the power that benefits me. We show up here on Sunday mornings because we believe that what we do matters. So I can't possibly believe that we might perpetrate or benefit from oppression and not have that create a spiritual disconnection in ourselves. How could I be systemically cut off from my neighbors without also being cut off from my deepest self? There is a mutual effect of the violence of oppression on all of us, and the need for liberation is universal. So where is hope emerging in all this? What is the good news, right? Well, down by the water, people are telling a liberation story. They are walking in the streets proclaiming that Black lives matter. They are lining up at border fences in Gaza, expecting a miracle, huddling in Damascus and Aleppo, begging the world to notice their suffering. They are showing up on our church doorsteps and asking us to provide sanctuary from deportation. This is an ancient story told many times before, and it is the story of our moment. It belongs to those telling it and those who came before them, but I know it includes me too. In fact, I'm only liberated by being there with the marginalized. The story in Exodus offers us this mysterious phrase to describe the people who went out of Egypt. A mixed crowd, it calls them. Everywhere else in the text, the people who are enslaved the people negotiating with Pharaoh, are referred to as Israelites or Hebrews. But those who make a final escape from empire's grasp, they are called a mixed crowd. The authors, I think, wrote in this little gift to us bystanders. Freedom for the marginalized, freedom for us, they promise, can be freedom for all. Your liberation is mixed up with ours. And this is how liberation from injustice works. Centering the voices and the stories of those on the margins can save us all. In fact, it's the only thing that will. My favorite theologian, John Sobrino, a liberation theologian, sums up his theology in one phrase: there is no salvation outside of the poor. Now, he doesn't mean that we each need to become impoverished to be healed or whole or set free from oppression. But he does mean that none of us will be free by leaving others out. No one is free without the poor, without the marginalized. No one is free when someone is left behind, is pushed to the sidelines. Liberation, he means, is going to the places and spaces of people who have been pushed to the margins and finding solidarity with them there. It is making room to shift their voices and stories, like the Passover tale in all its modern tellings, from the margins to the center. Because as long as we live in a world where people are discarded to the margins of life, are left outside of the borders of us, none of us is free. So we go to the water's edge in the expectation that when we wade out together in solidarity, the tide of liberation will heal all our wounds. And this story, which may not belong to us, comes to include us if we decide to let it. And like the psalm, the cry of how do we sing a song of freedom in a strange land becomes itself the freedom song. May it be so. I think let's change things around a little bit. I want to ask us to sing a hymn before we extinguish our chalice. Would you rise in body or in spirit and sing hymn number 121 with me? We'll build a land.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go
Will you join in reciting the words printed in your order of service as I extinguish our chalice this morning? We extinguish this light. I offer as a benediction the words of Gustavo Gutierrez. If there is no friendship with the marginalized and no sharing of the life of the poor, then there is no authentic commitment to liberation, because love exists only among equals. May our love be true and our freedom universal. Amen. Go in peace, make peace, be at peace.